Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Virginia SBDC's webinar series, Google and Beyond, Marketing and Managing on the Web. This series is designed to take a look at tools and techniques to help small businesses take their business to the next level. Today's webinar is Drafting Your ePolicy, Guidelines to Keeping Your Business on the Road to Success. All of our Google and Beyond webinars are presented by Ray Sidney Smith, web and mobile strategist, author of Solo Mo Success, Social Media, Local and Web Small Business Marketing Strategies Explained, and president of W3 Consulting, a digital business strategy and training firm. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type those questions into the question window and Ray will do his best to answer them. Without further ado, here's Ray Sidney Smith.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you to the Virginia Small Business Development Center Network for having me here on the Beyond Google Marketing and Managing on the Web series. As Tracy said, today we're going to be talking about drafting your e-policy and just a couple of housekeeping notes. Now is the time to ask questions. Tracy's there to man the question panel, so if you have any questions that you have regarding this, please feel free to go ahead and address those with Tracy, and she'll find a moment of air between one of my sentences to poke in and ask a question. So feel free to do so. If you have a burning question that happens after the webinar, there's going to be a final slide that will have my contact information. Feel free to reach out to me. And if you want to go ahead and ask those questions on Twitter, feel free to go to at W3 Consulting. Go ahead and tweet them at W3 Consulting. Hashtag this Beyond Google, and I'll know what you're talking about and be able to respond there effectively. As well, go ahead and follow at Virginia SBDC, which will, of course, keep you apprised of all of the various programs and other live webinars and trainings that the Virginia Small Business Development Center Network provides for you there in the Commonwealth of Virginia. So with that out of the way, let's talk about some of the agenda points of today. Today we are going to be talking about 7 different pieces of the ePolicy concept, and it's a very, very big topic. As I said, in the write-up, this is a full-day workshop that's taught, and there are people like Nancy Flynn, who's an expert specifically in this field and spends her entire career discussing this. But today we're going to cover 7 salient points of the ePolicy production process, and these are them, and we're gonna sort of do an overview of these items. First, we're going to talk about brand and employee monitoring, what they are and what they mean to you and your business. We're going to talk about electronic business records, and this is another important piece of the puzzle, but really understanding what the electronic business records perspective really brings to the table, and this covers a lot of different things that people don't really recognize. The email policies of your company, and having one, the various different policies and procedures that you have. We're going to talk about website, app, and social media policies. There are some great resources that you can find about this stuff online, and we're going to talk about some of the most important tips across each of these areas, but specifically within the website, app, and social media policies, because it's one of the greatest lackings today online. We're going to talk about mobile policies, the BYOD and the COPE policies and procedures, and you'll learn what those are as we make our way through the evening, afternoon today. We're going to talk about reviewing other ePolicy documents. Which are the other ePolicy documents that you should be checking out there? And then finally, we're going to talk about the culture shift that is really required for writing, implementing, and enforcing ePolicy. And so we talked a little bit about sort of that process in one of the past webinars, which was about implementing a CRM, really the culture shift in implementing a customer relationship management tool. So I'm not going to get too much into that aspect of it. You can go back to that webinar that is archived there on the virginiasbdc.org website, watch that webinar to really understand culture change. But we'll talk about some of the big ticket overview items that you really want to pay attention to when it comes to implementing the ePolicy. Okay, so first and foremost, I just want to give a quick sort of forewarning and disclaimer here for today's webinar. That is, the Internet and World Wide Web allows anyone to say anything they please, at least here in the United States. And so that means that anyone can say anything they want about your business. This includes your current employees and sometimes, unfortunately, disgruntled past employees, vendors, clients, and more. You must protect yourself and your business through drafting proper ePolicy, okay? So ePolicy means all of the policies and procedures that you publish internally and externally in order to be able to let people know the guidelines, the criteria, the standing rule of order for how you should conduct yourself online and offline, when it comes to digital communications that might not be public on the web, okay? So drafting your ePolicy is not a choice. It's a necessity for small business to protect itself today. Okay. Today we just learned the announcement. Well, late last night we learned the announcement that Anthem Insurance went ahead and had a breach. Someone hacked into their data, and 8 million personal records were potentially exposed. The reality is that I hope they've got a really fantastic ePolicy in place and the procedures to support it to make sure that they can respond to those kinds of things. Okay, so it may not be their security procedures that are really the most important thing here, because clearly they didn't work. Even if they are the best security procedures, sometimes they just don't work. Really, what stands now is how the staff and how everyone else is supposed to engage in collective, appropriate dialogue about the situation, because public relations within the company now has to address this, customer service has to address this. How do they do that? Well, the only way through that is through good ePolicy. As a forewarning and disclaimer as well, I will not be discussing legalities here, and I don't want to put on a lawyer hat here, but merely areas your small business should pay attention to. This is only an hour-long webinar, and this is a complex and developing area of law and business practice. So if you want to know your unique business legal risks and protections, you should seek out and talk to a licensed attorney in the state in which your business is registered for the best advice. So I just want to make sure that people understand. We're going to be talking about really big-ticket areas for your business, and sort of the side of the business practice that makes important, and we'll go from there. So with that out of the way, let's talk a little bit about brand and employee monitoring. Brand and employee monitoring really fits under the perspective of brand monitoring generally and employee monitoring specifically. Okay, so brand monitoring is the idea that you are paying attention to what's happening and being said about your business, publicly and internally within the company. Now, how much and to the level to which you do that becomes employee monitoring, and there are various legal issues relating to that, so I'm not going to get into that. But what I want to address here is that you need to be paying attention to what's being said about you. Okay, and to some extent, you may be wanting to pay attention to what's being said about key people within your organization, outside of your organization. Okay, so that goes into play that if someone is out there talking about Coca-Cola, you better believe Coca-Cola is surveilling that name across everywhere that it possibly can on the web, and it uses probably very sophisticated tools to be able to do so. As a small business, we don't really want to get so crazy. What we want to do is just basically have the various monitoring tools that we have available to us, which could be as simple as a Google search, to having more sophisticated tools. There are other tools out there that you can use to be able to do that. But the general point is that you need to write down somewhere what tools you're using, why you're using them, and making sure that everybody knows that it's being done. Because if people don't know that it's being done, then all of the other legal issues come up. Because if you just say to someone, hey, listen, everybody, we're paying attention to what's being said, it keeps honest people honest. All right? And you really want that to be the case. The other side is that when people are saying something about your business, you can capitalize on the positive, and then you can diminish the negative. Okay, and that's public relations 101, right? We want to be able to capitalize on the positive, diminish the negative, and even potentially spin it into a positive. So we have to start with the idea that we are monitoring everything that's being said about our brand. What's our brand? Names of the company, the names of the various DBAs the company might be running under, the names of all of our products and services that might be unique, trademarked or service marked, and images and or words or those kinds of things that are trademarked or service marked. So all of those particular items that you have out there should be saved Google searches, or you can set up something like Google Alerts or TalkWalker Alerts, which are both free products, and making sure that you are searching for those items, and then you can make the decision whether or not you want to pay attention to employee monitoring. I know there are various cases out there litigating about whether or not employers can ask for an employee or a potential employee's Facebook account information and all these other things that might be of issue of privacy to those particular employees. And there are arguments on both sides of the aisle about that issue, but the reality is that at the very least, public information should be monitored so that if an employee and your business brand name shows up, that you know what it says. Okay? Now, how you decide to deal with that is up to you, except that you now need to make sure that you publicly state it somewhere. Okay? So the first thing that I want to talk about with regard to ePolicy is that ePolicy is not always just one big, large document. It's several pieces of the puzzle. You might just, have a memo where you literally note to everybody and post it on, maybe the copy room wall, where it says, hey, these are the things we're monitoring online, we're using these tools, and these are the things that we're looking for when it relates to you specifically. And those things specifically related to you are when our name shows up with your name. Okay? So that people just are aware that you're doing it, and therefore they can one, respond if they need to, but also just carry themselves accordingly, appropriately within the context of a professional web persona. Okay? Because sometimes people just don't realize that that's an issue. And once they realize that they are being monitored, or that not even that they're being monitored, but that the brand is being monitored, then they know, okay, I don't want to be talking publicly about the company in a particular way, or I do want to be, you have employees who are brand advocates as well. You want them to talk about the company publicly, and that might get them the next promotion. That might get them the next, reward or accolade from you or someone else within the organization, and that's always a positive, okay? So always take this as a positive perspective, look at it from the ways in which you can do it. I always say don't try to be too invasive, but at the same time protect the organization. So from my perspective, it's always looking at what's being said about the company. If the employee is caught up in that search because it's being searched by the company, then that's appropriate because it's public. I'm not personally going to try and look at someone's personal information, but if anything is public, then I'm gonna want to know what it says. Okay. This takes us to the electronic business records world, okay? And this really ends up being a huge problem and also a great opportunity, because electronic business records really covers everything that you have, and that means you need to figure out what you have. So this is the opportunity to look at all of the various places where you put documents, okay? And starting to corral them into as few places as possible. So if you have a customer relationship management system, you've got electronic business records in a customer relationship management tool. If you have files and folders and records and directories on local computers as well as on a server or a shared hard drive somewhere, well, you've got electronic business records in those places as well. Go to your home computers, your home phone, your home mobile phone, your personal mobile phone, if you have a separate one from the business. If you transact any kind of business, you have maybe some business contacts that are on your personal phone, or some contracts or agreements or documents that you've been working on your personal computer at home. Those are electronic business records, okay? And while there may be some discussion or argument rhetoric about whether or not they are considered electronic business records for e-discovery purposes within the legalities, I'm not getting into that today. We are more concerned with making sure that from a business perspective, you're running on clean, sharp gears, and that means you've got to get all that stuff, all the detritus from all of those places and get them into as few places as possible. So corral those documents that are sitting on your personal drive and put them back into the one repository on your central network hard drive. Make sure that your staff and any other people that are working with you know to put them into a central repository, and that they can't keep the files that they might be working on actively. Great, but what if they get sick? What if they for some reason are injured or can't have, their computer crashes? You want them to get all of those documents into one place where the company can control the backup, retention, and disposal of those documents. So first and foremost, figure out what you have, okay? Then, what and how long are you going to keep those documents around? and how are you going to get rid of it? Okay, so lots of different systems are out there. I'm going to just pick on Google because I think Google, it has just a great solution involved, but there are lots of them out there that you can look at. But Google has Google Drive within the Google Apps for Work ecosystem, and what it does is it has this tool called Google Vault. And Google Vault can be set to say all of these files in this directory are important and they should be kept for X amount of time, and then after that X amount of time they are to be deleted. Okay, so that's an ideal system because it gives me granular access to who can have access to the files, and then it tells me when this stuff is going to be purged. Okay, and so you want something like that. Okay, where you can say, this is what we have, this is how it's categorized, and then this is what's going to be deleted. Now come back around to the full circle, and we have to figure out then who is allowed to share what within those files, okay, in those directories, and that's again going to be something that you're going to have to decide. Okay, these people in this particular area of the business are allowed to be able to do that. They have access to this stuff. These people, you know, are and have, you know, allowance to access it, and then these people are allowed to share it externally or with others within the company as needed, and then these are not. Okay, and you really have to have that clear delineation between who can share what and when and how. Okay, because if everybody could share everything, then not only you're probably breaking some state and federal laws, but you're also creating some internal problems with regard to what information equates to shareable and what information equates to non-shareable for your audience. And you always want to make sure that everybody is aware. This is not an issue necessarily of making people feel like they're being things are being hidden from them. This is more a perspective of making sure that people understand what can and cannot be shared. Okay, so while you might make everything accessible to everyone, if the organization perhaps is so small that that's the case, that might just be a practical matter. But when it comes to you have more than probably 2 employees, you are now in a perspective where things do need to start being divvied up, and things as basic as HR. You want to make sure that you're controlling financials and HR things to fall inside of the particular laws of your region. So make sure that you're doing those things. Now we wrap this all up in the bundle of, once again, how do we communicate that? Okay, this is something that probably gets a header within the ePolicy, sort of a Word document or some kind of other text document that says electronic business records. What do we have? Where is it stored? Where are you required to store it? For how long? And this is when we purge. If it's a manual process, you're directed to delete this stuff on an X number of X period basis. So tell them how often, how many periods pass by before things are deleted, and then those things are done. What things are to be kept in, into perpetuity. All right, and then of course who's allowed to share it, and for what reasons they're allowed to share those things, and then what things are not shared and why. Just explain that to people, because many times people will not know the laws or the particular practices of your business. This is an opportunity to educate them so that they're not allowing water cooler discussion to potentially malign good business management practice because of compliance, as opposed to good business management practice because of some kind of micromanagement or hiding something or whatever that might be. Really educate them as to why you're doing something, and most often than not, the culture picks up on the fact that you're being open, honest, and just with people, and that usually creates a better environment. Okay, so if any questions, feel free to go ahead and poke in and ask Tracy to ask me, and I'll be happy to do that. And then otherwise, we're going to move into the wonderful and open world of email policies, which really encompasses email communications, etiquette, and then of course retention and disposal. So very similar to electronic business records, except now we're talking about the communications that happen within the organization, and we'll get into some of the really important things that come into this. So email is a big bear, and there's so many different parts of it, but there are some really all-encompassing pieces of the puzzle that I want to discuss here, and so I've just broken them up into 3 different items, and that will help us really look at email from a very clear picture with overarching broad policies that will hopefully have the most affect on your business's business's best practices and therefore your business's systems and processes. So let's start off at the top. I know that a lot of people will probably struggle with this, but emails are letters. Emails may not seem like letters to you because they're quick, they're fast, they're short, hopefully, and sweet. But the reality is that you should treat emails just like you would a letter for electronic business records purposes. Okay? This is in staunch contrast to what people currently do, which is they think of email as, short phone conversations or whatever that might be, like basically ephemeral communication. Email is not ephemeral communication. It is permanent, hard data. That means that people will print these emails, they will save them as recipients, they will lock them up in databases because their email hosts will have backups of backups of backups. And so emails, think of them as letters, okay? Digital ones, but letters nonetheless. So a yes response or an okay response or sure responding back to a group of people is just as powerful as you having written, a 4-paragraph beautifully printed on bond paper letter and mailed it through U.S. Postal Service. Okay? Period. All right? Now, I say that so that you look at letters that you send as important documentation in your business processes and the standards in which you hold yourself in communication and the standards in which you hold your employees to those communications. Okay? So you have to have good practices of saying to them, when do you send an email? When do you not send an email? Okay? When is a phone call or talking to someone in person far better than sending a letter? Okay? And if that's the standard, then you start to see a whole lot less email and a whole lot better email being sent. Why? Because, if you're going to just, have a friendly conversation with Sally down the hall, well, you wouldn't do that by letter, okay? At least not in today's age. So you would go ahead and get up and go talk to Sally. And now what have you done? You've reduced the server load. Those emails have to run through a server. That's costs energy and money to everyone in the business. And when you take those on the aggregate, one email probably is not very much energy or server time. But now 20 or 30 or 40, I track the number of text messages I transact on a given month. And sometimes that runs into the 7,000 to 8,000 text messages a month realm. And that's because I transact a lot of those communications through my staff and my personal life and so on and so forth, and I can only imagine if I was doing that via email. Email is not the appropriate mechanism for those kinds of short back and forth conversations. So you can say, if you're going to have short conversations, have those via IM chat, instant messaging chat. Have those by phone. Have those by a face-to-face conversation or a Skype conversation. But email should be left to those things that require a sort of an officialness. It doesn't have to sound formal, but it certainly has to have an officialness to it. Okay, I've beat a dead horse. I hope that you understand that emails are letters, and you should then, of course, figure out how to address people with an email, okay, which is to always be polite. So many times I see people who are in business who are potentially, trying to get things done, and so they get sort of lost in the world of getting things done, and they feel like if I just pass the hot potato, to someone else, then great, it's off my plate and doing so. And in the process, they go ahead and they sound somewhat impolite, okay? And so always read your emails to see whether or not you're being polite. This may sound like a platitude, but it's true. You can disagree but not be disagreeable. And so many times what I hear is a tone in an email that's not expressed properly because you're emoting as opposed to providing useful, productive, progressive information that is allowing progress to happen. So, look at your emails to make sure that you're being polite, because in business, people don't like working with people who are impolite. People like working with people that they like. And if you don't think that you can like me, why would you want to do business with me? And so you're going to turn a a happy customer into an unhappy customer, which repeats to no repeat business if you continue to email in that way. So I always say that in your email policies, you should write into your ePolicy document some general etiquette guidelines for how to go ahead and approach people. And there's things like the email charter. If you go to emailcharter.org, and there's the 7 sentences, 5 sentences, and 3, I think, sentences policy. If you just Google 5 sentences, email policy, you'll find those links out there to those things. And they allow for an understanding among people about the length of email and about the way in which you should address people, and not having those photos. People have these image logos of things in their email signature. Those are actually sort of gauche, because lots of systems, especially the Mac system, picks them up as attachments. And so people have certain, scanning software for viruses and other kinds of ways that their system misrenders the email because of those kinds of embedded images. So, just read the email charter. Those things might want to be lifted and put into your ePolicy. And in those particular cases, since it's internal documentation, copying is the best form of flattery. So go ahead and plagiarize all you want with things like with the email charter. So you can go ahead and do that. And then the final sort of key point here with ePolicies with email, we want to make sure that we save pertinent emails to client files. This goes back to number 1. Emails are letters, right? And what do you do with letters? You file them when you need to appropriately file them in your system. So from my perspective, you need to make sure that you're going in and you are saying this email is important enough to be saved to the client file. This email is not. Okay, so now you need to go ahead and train your staff to do the same thing. Because if your staff saves all the email that you transact with your client, well, that's going to be a mess, okay? Because you're just going to have a litany of hundreds of messages in your client files and folders that might not be useful, okay? The other side is that if your email, for some reason, holds the email in a particular proprietary format, you need to fix that, okay? So that you can either print them as PDF, on screen and save them, or you can save them in a standard open format. The .eml format is a pretty open standard that people use. So figure out the standard file format of the emails and figure out how that's done as well, and make that aware to your staff. Again, this is all about communicating forward to your staff and to the people who work with you so that these things are all done consistently. You have to do them, and you have to be the model of it, but you also then have to make sure that everybody else is doing that within the company. So make sure that you're as I'm giving these, you're understanding that I'm actually telling you to tell people how to do this. This is what you're writing into your ePolicy, okay? So you want to save those pertinent emails to client files and then delete the rest. One practice that we do within the company is we like to save the last email in the string so that all of the conversation has been captured, and then that's the one that actually gets saved into the client file. And now when I look at the client file, I don't just see the files and agreements and so on and so forth, but I also see the conversations that happened in the same time frames with them, right? Complete picture of that client project, not a partial picture, right? So that really helps the business process, because if something happened, I don't know it because it's locked away in somebody else's email. Now the email's in this file, and I know what the conversation that was had, and I can respond to it effectively and really provide great customer service because of that, because I can say, oh, you know what, all of this transacted, this is great information, let me approach the client knowing exactly what was said. And then, of course, making sure that your staff knows to document phone conversations when they are of importance. So say you have a conversation with a client, well, you go ahead and have that conversation, all right, follow it up with an email summarizing what was discussed, so that if there are misunderstandings about what was said, those can be cleared up in writing before everybody, very transparent, very clear, and then getting that into the file record. That's an email that you want to save into your files, so that right along with your contracts and agreements and letters and other things, you have a clear understanding of a conversation that was had that was important. Okay? So those are the 3. Keep your emails as letters. Treat them as letters in a way so that you're capable of keeping it in the right context. Be polite, and of course save only the important emails to your client files, and then you can have your email system then purge like every year or whatever you want it to, tell it to delete the oldest email, so that you keep a clean system in place. Or you could do what I do, which is I delete everything as I process it. So if it doesn't require a response, it gets saved or it gets deleted. In my case, it gets archived, in the Google Mail sense, and then Google knows to delete that email on a schedule. Okay, so you can make that decision on how that works, but then make sure that you're communicating that within your ePolicy. All right, we're going to move ourselves along, if there are no questions, to web app social media policies. Okay, so people don't frequently realize this, but your website needs to have some legal documentation, okay? And if you decide to launch an app, you need to have some guidelines in terms of what the appropriate use of the app is, both for your staff and for the people who are using it, okay? Many people know about terms of service and terms and conditions and user terms and policies as it relates to Facebook and other kinds of social networks. Well, you need to have the same things for your website, your app, and your social media, and how you communicate those out to the world, okay? So there are a couple of different things we need to think about when we think about communications, etiquette, and then management and maintenance. And I'm going to take you through this based on the four sort of areas that I think are most important, of greatest importance, which are your websites, your blogs, social networks, and then I include email and online forums in that, and then of course smartphone apps. So let's start with your website. Who can publish and modify the text? Okay? This is really important because a lot of people consider no one culpable because everyone sort of points the finger at one another when something goes wrong, and this is the time to really to clean that up and just close that spigot off. All right. So in your ePolicy for your website app and social media policies, you really need to let people know who can publish and modify text. Now again, if you have a website that's self-hosted, then you control, but based on the hosting, what is going on your website. But say you use an external service like Wix.com or Squarespace or Magento or another tool like that, or you have a hosted solution somewhere else. Well, you don't really own that real estate as much as you do if you owned and had a self-hosted WordPress site or self-hosted HTML site that sits on your own, inside your own hosting account. So you need to really make sure that you've read those policies as well, and I'm going to talk about that as we go forward, to make sure that you're communicating to people what can and cannot be done. For example, on Squarespace and in Wix, they have particular terms about what you can and cannot post on your own website. Okay, that's less so or the case of concern on a self-hosted website. And that's not a bad thing. It's just that you need to make sure you know what you can and cannot post. As well, if you've decided to have a mobile a mobile website developed, and you're using a special tool to be able to render that mobile app, you will then want to know what the requirements are so that you can communicate that to your staff, and then explain to folks what access they have available to them, and what you should publish, and how you should modify text. So for instance, if you go ahead and modify text, every 5 minutes on your website, that would be a big waste of time, okay? And unless you were live blogging an event, that would be really useless to basically go onto your blog and update it every 5 minutes. You couldn't produce enough content to make it useful to Google, and you wouldn't make it really useful to the person's time. Well, that's a logistics issue, right? And really that's a marketing ROI, labor ROI, all of those kinds of things. So that needs to be in the policy so people understand that really if there's something that's wrong on the website, correcting errors is important, but producing content at a rate of X amount of time is not. So therein lies exporting some of that ePolicy to another document, like a social media editorial calendar, or just what I call a web editorial calendar now, or a social editorial calendar now. So we have this overarching calendar where we tell people when we should, update the websites, who's updating them, and what we're updating them with. And now all of that doesn't need to be in the ePolicy. We just basically say, hey guys, check out, this editorial calendar. That's going to be the reigning document for how we manage our web, app, and social discussions. Okay, so it really helps with sort of taking a lot of text that would otherwise be a lot of text in the ePolicy and turning it into refer to this other tool that will help us do that. And I really enjoy using Trello. This is just a personal note. I love Trello for being able to set up these kinds of sort of calendar-like things by using boards within Trello month by month and sort of getting them all lined up there, because you can just do all of that delegation and having conversations within the calendar all right within the tool. So really cool there. Next up, have a writing style guide for your entire business. Now, most people think of style guides and they think of brand guides where people tell you where you can place your logo, how much space, the kerning between letters of your logo type so that if your name appears somewhere, how much space should show up between those letters, line spacing, all of those fun stuff in a brand guide. Well, I think you should have a writing style guide in your referenced in your ePolicy that you publish for your staff and yourself. And that means we never use these words, whatever those words might be. In my company, we don't use particular types of technical jargon when we write on our blog. So our writing style guide specifically says we don't use this jargon on the blog. But if we do, then it is always when we're defining it. Okay? So that means that someone coming to my blog should understand everything that is being said there, because the presumption is that you don't know all of the various fancy, jargon that the latest marketers have come up with, most of which sounds silly, by the way. And so we want to make sure that we go ahead and write that down. Maybe in your particular industry you have some particular terms that you do and must use when you are, adding there. I know for those of you who are financial advisors watching this now, you know that you have lots of, information that you have to attach to most public-facing online, publications. So you want to make sure that you make that a note in there, refer to X to make sure that all of these are in compliance so that legal doesn't come back to you and have a problem. Okay? So just make sure that you're paying attention to those kinds of things, but writing is the core of publishing online. Okay? All the pictures and all the videos in the world are great, but really the core of the content you're producing is the writing, because that's how Google's going to be able to find you, and you want to make sure that that's pristine and that's communicating effectively on behalf of the business. And that writing, it has longevity. It follows you through many different areas. So take your writing and look at that across all of your web and offline, printed materials, and write an effective style guide to really get that in place. Okay? Finally, I like to call it all eyes on deck. Okay? So this is where we really look across, again, your website, any blog or blogs that you might have, social networks, email, online forums, and smartphone apps that you might have published for the business, and make sure that everybody possible that can be looking at it is looking at it. Because while, as I mentioned earlier, Sally down the hall might not be the most meticulous person. But Rick, who's sits next to me in the office, Rick is a fastidious editor, and if he's looking at it as often as Sally is, they're going to see different things. Sally might notice that the design is just a little bit dated, whereas Rick might notice that the word "the" is spelled wrong twice on the home page. Okay? Now, there's just egg on your face when a customer comes to your website and sees that your "the" is spelled wrong. But it's the more creative people, the more visually oriented folks who will notice that the site is just a little bit dated, and you might not be the people that they want to work with. So just a little update to the tweaking by listening to both Sally and to Rick, you're going to be able to get a more full body picture of what should be happening on your website, your app, and social media, both from the words and the visuals of what's being presented, as well as the functionality. Because I bet you that Rick, the more fastidious, meticulous person, is going to notice that, there's 3 clicks to be able to get to this particular page. That's really annoying. And then you can make that correction, all right? And this, again, goes back to making sure that you're using technologies like Google Analytics, which is free and works within email, your website, your mobile site, your e-commerce, and your advertising, as well as now your mobile apps. So you want to make sure that Google Analytics is in all of them, and you're paying attention to what people are writing and making sure that you're then backflowing that data into your writing style guide. All right? So you want to make sure that your website, app, and social media policies are in there. There's a really great website out there that's called socialmediagovernance.com, and it has many, many policies of major corporations and companies out there that have social media policies published, as well as nonprofit organizations and other kinds of institutions. And so you can actually see their social media policies and then adapt that for your own. So again, plagiarize, plagiarize, plagiarize. It's the only time I can say that without, without too much problem. So you just copy and paste it into your document, look at it to see whether or not it's useful to you, and then tailor it to your own needs. But I think that the style guide should be something separate. So again, like I said, you want to make sure that your style guide is just a quick, easy, visually pleasing document to people. So lots of bullet points, lots of numbers, just like doing sort of this PowerPoint presentation that you're seeing in front of you. You want to make sure that people see very easy, quick information so that they can, get the data that they need and get moving on it. Okay? So that closes out web, app, and social media, and we're going to move ourselves on to mobile policies. Mobile policies are, again, another big topic issue, and I'm going to try and sort of move us into some of the bigger items we want to pay attention to, related to it. So first and foremost, this is a camper. I don't know what I guess the branded term is a Winnebago. And I always told myself that as a present for law school, completing law school, I would take a cross-country trip in a Winnebago. And while it has never happened, I really still do want to do it. And I've taken several trips on, in campers, and that's really the only kind of camping I like. I'm not the biggest person for pitching a tent and in the middle of the woods. I like indoor plumbing, those kinds of things. So that's just me. I'm sure some of you out there love camping, and it's a wonderful outdoor activity to do with the family and otherwise. But what we know about camping is that you can't bring everything, okay? And that means some stuff has to stay home. And that's really the overarching issue with regard to mobile, is pare down mobile to as few things as possible. If you think about what you're doing in mobile as what can we bring on the camper, okay, then what we end up getting is a much more pared down view of things. So what does that mean? Okay. Well, if you try to have too many products, that is, you issue your employee a BlackBerry or another phone plus their personal one. Well, now you have one additional item for someone to lose. Okay? If everybody's issued a laptop, for instance, in your company, now you have, desktop computers plus laptops plus mobile phones, which equates to more things to lose, which has crucial business data on it, and security risks of losing that data, of your business data as well as your clients. And so we really want to say, what is it that absolutely must come and fit in the camper, and what are those things that cannot and should not be brought? Okay? So maybe we don't want to bring the flat screen television and push that into the camper. Okay? That's the kind of sort of litmus you have to have. I've got a backpack, and that's all I can fit in the the compartments of the camper. That's it. All right? Those are the kinds of things you need to make in terms of setting up effective ePolicy. Now, what we know is that today, just like the picture shows, lots of people are and have their own mobile phones, and they are out there using it in all kinds of areas. The only thing missing from this gentleman's picture is probably a beer. Okay, and so what I'm trying to convince you, or at least to demonstrate for you, is that people are out there with their phones, potentially your phones, and they are, having a drink. They're having a good time with their friends and family. Slips and falls happen. The phones get left and lost. You need to be prepared for what happens and what the appropriate, things are that people need to be doing when they have your mobile devices and or their mobile devices out in public when you have, with your business data on it, okay? So this comes down to not only how they communicate with customers on the road, with your devices and with your customers, that kind of thing, what tools they're using, again, going back to etiquette, and of course, how much data you're using and retention, because how much data you're using equates to an absolute cost to the business. If you use so much data, on roaming charges, all those things, they need to be outlined, but also then how long that data actually sits on that phone, okay, or on that laptop or on that tablet, okay. So here are just a couple things for you to think about. One, who can be mobile? Who is allowed to, one, bring your own device, which is the BYOD I mentioned at the top of the hour, and then of course the COPE, COPE, the company-owned but personally engaged mobile device. Okay, so BYOD means that I brought it. COPE means that you gave it to the employee or the staff person or the vendor. Okay, so who can be mobile? A or B, and describe to them, just in a couple of sentences, an overarching philosophy for how they should handle themselves. Like, for example, between the hours of 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. at my company, everyone who is COPE is required to have their phone on and fully charged and available to it. After those hours, that's no longer the case. It's actually discouraged. So I do not want your COPE mobile on. It should be turned off, and it should be charging after the hours of 6 p.m. Eastern to 8 a.m. Eastern the following day. The reason for that is that, one, I heavily believe in life-work balance. Although I don't model that very well for my own company, I do believe in that for my staff, and I want them to do that. Okay, so that's a personal note. But at the same time, that's how companies are run. They're really run based on people, right? So for my people, I want them rested and available to me during those hours. I want them fully present during those hours, and that's one way in which I've approached it with them, which is saying when you do that, that's the case. Whereas with BYOD, I discourage people from using their personal devices except for those communications that are ephemeral. Okay, so text message, back and forth between my staff is appropriate when they might be off hours. I know they don't have their COPE device on, and I want to make sure that I can communicate with them about something very important, which could be sick leave. It could be, are you safe because you live in an area of the country that just had a tornado that just recently happened, and those kinds of things. So I'm gonna communicate with their BYOD device because of that, and then those kinds of things. If they are BYOD devices, then for my company we actually say only Google services are being allowed to be used. Why? Because we use Google Apps for work, and I have central control over all of the login and data through Google Apps for work for those BYOD applications. So in essence, any data they might have being used is basically being used by Google services. Anything that's not a Google service, really the only two exceptions are two other services that we use where I have also administrative access to be able to cut those things off. So the case in point is 2 years ago, I had a staff member pass away abruptly. And with the loss of my staff member, that meant that all the data she was working on that day, all of the clients that she had in communication with, all of those things had to be really quickly and easily captured, and she was working on all BYOD devices. So, because she was working from home. So, when she passed away, I was able to go into Google Apps for Work. I was able to just cut off all of her accounts, transfer those over to my other project, my other program manager, and our workshop series stayed on. Okay, and I couldn't have done that if I didn't have that, highest level control over all the data being done and used within the Google environment. So while I'm a Google advocate personally, professionally, it has saved me so much that it really just makes so much sense. So pay attention to that. Who can be mobile? Not everyone needs to have a mobile device. So you could say to them, you don't need to have a mobile phone, and then of course figuring out payment. So many times, if you're going to require someone to be available on the road or by mobile, then companies typically have some kind of compensation package where they pay for part of the mobile phone bill or whatever it might be commensurate with its use. You figure that out, but you sort of have to sort of figure that out and write that in a policy that is given to everyone. Next is importance of status, and I don't mean status symbols. I mean importance of status in things like your IM chat or availability to receiving texts and so on and so forth. So going back to the COPE devices for me means between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. you should be available to communications, which means that if you say that you're available right now in your IM chat, then I should be able to, just as I would walk up to you at your desk, I should be able to talk to you, okay? If your status says that you're away or offline, then I know that you're not, okay? So it's a very strict rule in our office that if you say that you're online and available, I should be able to presume you're like standing in front of me, I should be able to talk to you. If you don't, then it would be as though you were standing in front of me and ignoring me. All right, that's the presumption that I've created within our ePolicy. So you need to figure out what those statuses mean to your staff and people, and then saying, okay, if you say your status is away or status on the phone, you need to make sure that you update it when you come off the phone or when you come back to your desk, so that we can have effective business flow throughout the day. You set your away message and leave it there for 4 hours. Well, then I presume that you're loafing off, right? And that's not appropriate. So make sure that people know what the importance of those statuses are. Next, short is not sweet always, okay? Sometimes a quick text message as you're rushing from your car to the office or otherwise ends up being a moving the peg forward, but really moving the peg backwards 2 slots also, because you forgot a word, you said something in a manner that was potentially terse and insensitive. Make sure that because you're writing in short messages on mobile, you are letting people know what those things mean. All right, and that means your staff needs to know that also. So many people end up not utilizing mobile technology. For instance, taking a screen capture and sending the screen capture plus a couple of words can be far more evocative and effective in communicating than just the words yes. Most mobile communications today aren't threaded. So I might say yes, and I meant yes to 2 threads of conversation above, but because I said yes, you may have thought it was to the last question that you sent through that I didn't even read before I sent my yes response. So now we have a miscommunication because I was trying to be short and sweet, and instead of saying yes about the contract A, I now have said yes to us buying a $5 million truck that we don't need, right? Just as a hyperbole. But the point is that you don't want to be quick and dirty here when that will of course hurt you. So make sure that you're paying attention to those things. It's really, really important. Okay, finally, and this is really quick because this is really just sort of easy, which is you should be reviewing other ePolicy documents. Where they're published, you should be looking at ePolicy. Okay, so first and foremost, start with your bank. So many times financial institutions are required by various laws to federal and state laws to publish these kinds of ePolicies. So are they in compliance? Are they doing the things that they should be doing? And I'm not going to get into the specifics of this, but really you should be reading those bank policies as it relates to how they're handling mobile banking, how they're relating to the notifications of documents, download of particular statements that they should be issuing to you. I don't mean by bank statements, but I mean other informational statements that they should be issuing to you. Really pay attention to that. 2 is understand the e-sign Act, okay? So the e-sign Act is the Electronic Signatures in Global and National Commerce Act, okay? And that was the law signed into law by President Bill Clinton, and the e-sign Act makes a signature in digital as legitimate as a physical, handwritten signature, ink and pen. So ink and paper. So make sure that you understand the e-sign Act, because more and more people are presuming that they understand that I sent that email and I said, that'll work. Sincerely yours, Joe. That established a contract in that email, and you need to make sure that you're up to date on whether or not you accepted that contract or not, and those types of things. So pull up a copy of the e-sign Act, read about it online, that kind of thing. And the other urge I would make is to check out tools like HelloSign, which I talked about in the last webinar, which is an e-signature tool that allows you to manage those kinds of documents that you would regularly have signed. So instead of having to email back and forth a document and fax and so on and so forth, you could literally just send them a link to a HelloSign document. They can e-sign it. There are other tools out there like DocuSign and eSignature.com and other Adobe products and whatnot. So you could go ahead and try out those other e-signature tools, but really understand eSign and understand HelloSign and how those affect your business. And finally, explain what you've read about these other e-policies. If you work with vendors who have e-policies, if you work with other businesses that have e-policies, explain those in the e-policy to your staff or tell them you should read this. Really, really important that everybody's on the same page. Okay, finally, I wanted to talk about writing, implementing, and enforcing ePolicy. So first and foremost, you need to really look at this from the perspective that you need to change culture here. This is not something that happens overnight. I really recommend that you spend the 2 to 3 hours culling together the stuff that we talked about. Literally, in the time that we have been on this webinar, you could have, looked online, found some samples of things, thrown together the ePolicy in that time frame, okay, and then gone ahead and written the style guide, pulled in the ePolicies from other people that you're working with, packaged that all up together, looked at a couple people in the company who might be willing to review this and to sort of come together as a team and say, let's look at this together, okay? That's an hour-long meeting, right? We're going to come together, we're going to look at this, that's another hour, that's 2 hours, and then finally we're going to publish this to everybody as a draft for everyone to look at and provide a commentary on, and then they're going to send back their comments, and, just their comments to you, one-to-one, or to the person you've set up as the team lead for this project, and they're going to incorporate, after a discussion with you, 30 minutes discussion with you, 30 minutes to add those items back into the ePolicy, and then the ePolicy is published. Okay, so that's your 2 to 3 hours, and you've got an ePolicy, and now you've protected your business, like hand over foot, protected your business from all kinds of problems. Plus, you've increased efficiencies. You have brought your staff together in the production process of the ePolicy production, so there's going to be a better corporate culture change and all of those other things. So here goes this 3 things I want to pay attention to when it comes to writing, implementing, and enforcing ePolicy. First, you are not the police. You're not law enforcement. Don't police. What you want to do is encourage culture change. Okay? Something that a lot of people do is they go out there and they write this ePolicy and they say, follow it. And really, at the end of the day, that's not what you want to do with people. People don't deal with the stick so well as they deal with the carrot. Okay? So you want to invest in people, and that's where this process really works out. Spend some time drafting the policy yourself. Engage a few people to take it up as a team effort. Go out and take that second draft, get it out to everybody to provide commentary, and then come back and put together a final version and let people know what that final version is all about. I love to adhere to the book called Empowerment Takes More Than a Minute by Dr. Kenneth Blanchard. I have probably referenced this on prior webinars, but I cannot say how wonderful that book is. It's a quick read. It's done in an allegorical fashion. Just a little short story. It has a really wonderful diagram in there about how empowerment works within an organization, and so you can really do a great job of getting that into place. Okay, so provide those policies, procedures, get responsibility, autonomy, rewards, and responses, not punishments, responses to those procedures in place, and you'll have a great sort of culture change, as opposed to something that's a little bit more police-driven, top-down driven, that's not going to be adopted. People will forget the policy exists. You'll never update it, and those kinds of things. Reverse that paradigm by getting people responsible, giving autonomy, and rewarding people for using it, and you'll have a lovely, wonderful, vibrant ePolicy. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tracy to close out. I know that we're at the hour, so we'll close out. I'll be happy to stay around for question and answer and go from there.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Right now we don't have any questions, so I am going to go ahead and close it out. Thanks, everyone, for participating today. Today's webinar was recorded and will be posted on the Virginia SBDC website under live recordings and webinars and recordings. Tomorrow you'll be receiving a follow-up email, and there'll be an evaluation link in that email. Please help us to continue to improve our training by taking the time to complete the evaluation. If you'd like to complete it now, I have just posted it in the chat window, and you can go ahead and click on that evaluation and give us some feedback. See you all on February 19th for our next webinar. Thanks, everyone.